Hello, today's topic menstrual cycle in video 8 under the chapter human reproduction. So what is menstrual cycle? Menstrual cycle is a reproductive cycle found in primate females like monkeys, apes and human beings. The menstrual cycle starts at a stage or around the age 12 to 15 years, and that stage is known as menarche. And the menstrual cycle gets over, that it gets ended at a particular stage in the life of the female, that is around 50 to 55 years, and that particular stage is known as menopause. So once again, menstrual cycle is a reproductive cycle found in primate females like monkeys, apes and human beings. It begins at a particular stage in the life of the female, that is in humans around 12 to 15 years of age, and that stage in the life of the human female is known as menarche, and it gets over completely at a particular stage like say 50 to 55 years, and that stage is known as menopause. There are 4 phases in the menstrual cycle. They are the menstrual phase, follicular phase, ovulatory phase, and finally the luteal phase. So the 4 phases of the menstrual cycle are the menstrual phase, next follicular phase, followed by the ovulatory phase, and the last phase is the luteal phase. Why it is called cyclic? Because this menstrual cycle is repeated at an average interval of 28 to 35 days. It gets repeated. That's why the menstrual cycle is cyclic, and it's so called as menstrual cycle. Now, very importantly, in the middle of the cycle, if the cycle of that particular female is a 28-day cycle, the middle of 28 is 14. So around 14th or the 15th day, the egg is released. That's very important to note this particular day, the middle of the cycle. If for a 28-day cycle, the 14th or the 15th day is in the middle. At this particular day, the egg is released, and that is known as ovulation. Accordingly, if it's a 30-day cycle, what will be the middle of the cycle? It will be 15 to 16. It will not be correctly 15 or 16. Same way if it's 32, accordingly the correct middle of the cycle, egg is released, and that process is called ovulation. So whenever we depict a menstrual cycle, you put the scale below in the x-axis, and immediately what you have to do is to demarcate the ovulation. That is the correct middle of the cycle. It varies from women to women. It's not a hard and fast rule that all women should have 28-day cycle. It varies from persons to persons and from the person's health conditions also. So I am taking the menstrual cycle as depicted in your NCRT, the exact text diagram, menstrual cycle. Okay. So the first phase is the menstrual phase. See? The second phase is the follicular phase. The third phase is the ovulatory phase. See, that is demarcated. Ovulation. Just one day. Then, and the fourth phase is the luteal phase. So let's say the duration. For example, let this person's menstrual cycle, the menstruation last only for say 5 to 6 days. So I am demarcating till 5th day as menstruation. So the menstrual phase is from 1 to 5 for this person. So from 5 to ovulation, that is from the 6th day to ovulation. Here let the ovulation be on the 14th day. So this phase is the follicular phase. Then ovulation occurred on the 14th day. So from 15th to the end of the cycle or to the next cycle is the luteal phase. So you understood the demarcation on the x-axis. First of all, you have to draw the x-axis with 1 to 30 days or 1 to 28 days, and most importantly draw the center of the cycle. That is, if it's a 30-day cycle, draw a line at the center demarcating ovulation. Now consider the female to have menstruation lasting for 5 to 6 days. So that is the menstrual phase. Then after that phase till ovulation will be the follicular phase, and from after ovulation till the end of the cycle will be the luteal phase. That's why it's very important to demarcate ovulation. So you got the duration of the 4 phases. Now before going and interpreting the text diagram, we can learn it from this particular diagram where the uterus and the associated structure is drawn. So when you are asked the menstrual cycle, you have to emphasize on 2 events. The 2 events are, I am highlighting the 2 events. One is the ovarian event and 2 is the uterine event. Uterine, to be specific, uterine endometrium events. So when you are explaining each phase, you have to explain the status of the ovarian follicle in the ovaries and the status of the uterine endometrium. So these 2 points you have to have in mind. So this is the uterus with the ovaries. Now let's start with the menstrual cycle or the menstrual phase. See, here did you notice this? This is the uterine endometrium. We know the uterus is lined by 3 membranes: endometrium, myometrium, perimetrium. Here we are concerned with only the uterine endometrium, the inner lining. Look at the inner lining, it's very thick. See, you can understand from this picture, it's very thick and spongy. Okay, so this uterine endometrium is very thick, prepared for pregnancy. Each month it is getting prepared for pregnancy. So this is the status of the uterus. Now we are going to see the status at this particular time, the status of the egg. Here the egg is released by ovulation. Egg is already released by ovulation. See, from here it went here, it is in the ampulla, we know. It remains there for 72 days. Anticipating for the fertilizing with the sperm. Now mating or copulation didn't take place. So this egg is unfertilized. Now what happens to this egg? This egg trickles down from the ampulla through the isthmus, comes down to the uterus. This unfertilized egg along with the uterine endometrium disintegrates. See, I am indicating disintegrates, ruptures, and is released out as blood through the vagina. So once again, because fertilization didn't take place, it comes through the isthmus, it comes to the uterus. This unfertilized egg along with the uterine, thickened uterine endometrium disintegrates and is shed off as blood through the vagina. This process is called menstruation, and this lasts for 5 to 6 to 7 days. So this is the first phase. So I have emphasized the uterine, the event occurring in the uterus, and also in the ovaries. I didn't tell you what is the status of the ovaries. We know the ovaries have the ovarian follicles in the cortex at various stages of development. So here the ovarian follicles are at which stage? I have drawn the most initial stage. The ovarian follicles are immature. They are not at all developed. They have not been developed into the primary ovarian follicle. So during menstruation we have the ovarian follicle as immature small ovarian follicles. They have not matured at all into the primary ovarian follicle. So this is all about menstruation. So a brief account on menstruation, which is the first phase. The duration is, it lasts from 1 to 5 or 6 days. What happens here is the unfertilized egg along with the uterine endometrium ruptures and is released out as blood through the vagina. This is the uterine event. Now what is the status of the ovaries? The ovarian follicles are at the earliest stage, that is immature. They appear as immature ovarian follicles. So this is the menstrual phase. Next, moving on to the follicular phase. So I am taking another diagram to depict follicular phase. So this was menstruation, that was already depicted. Now see, the same thing is depicted here, menstrual flow. Okay, now we are moving on to this phase, the proliferative phase. Proliferative phase is also known as follicular phase. I will see the reason why it is called proliferative or why it is called follicular phase. Now you remember this phase, the next phase. What happens? Now you look, focus here, how is the uterine endometrium? It is very thin. Now slowly as days proceed, so if this is the 7th day, as it proceeds to 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 to the 15th day, what happens to the uterine endometrium? It slowly becomes thicker and thicker. It regenerates by the process of proliferation. We have learnt in 11th standard what is proliferation. So that's why this phase is also known as proliferative phase. It is called proliferative phase because the uterine endometrium gets regenerated by the process of proliferation. So I am going to regenerate. Regeneration becomes thicker and thicker. So if this was the initial thickness, it becomes thicker, thicker and thicker. See, the next one is, they made it thick. Okay, by proliferation. That's why this phase is known as proliferative phase. So this is the uterine event that is occurring during the follicular phase. So what is the uterine event occurring? Just simple as this, regeneration of the uterine endometrium through proliferation. Now we are going to see the status of the ovarian follicles. So earlier I told the ovarian follicles are at which stage? At the first stage, that's immature stage. But now in this follicular phase, we can see the ovarian follicles grow from primary ovarian follicles, it becomes secondary ovarian follicle, then it becomes tertiary ovarian follicle, and finally it becomes a Graafian follicle. So all this occurs during the proliferative phase. I have indicated there. So what is happening in the ovaries? The ovarian follicles are progressing from the first stage, primary ovarian follicle, it grows into secondary, from secondary becomes tertiary, and from tertiary becomes the Graafian follicle. This is the ovarian events that occurs during the follicular phase or the proliferative phase. So once again a repeat of the second phase, which is called follicular phase or proliferative phase. The duration, first point is the duration. It is from the end of menstrual cycle. For example, menses gets over on the 6th day. So it is from the 7th day till the ovulation, say 15th day. So that's the duration of the follicular phase. Now what happens in the uterus? In the uterus, what happens? The uterine endometrium regenerates through proliferation. And what happens? What is the status of the ovarian follicles in the ovaries? You can see the ovarian follicles progresses or develops or grows from primary to secondary to tertiary to the final stage, that is the Graafian follicle. By now you know the structure of all these phases. Next very important phase, which just lasts for 1 day. Very important. When I started also I told that is a diagram you have to demarcate when you get the scale. That is ovulation. So here I am demarcating it as ovulation. It occurred on the 15th day. See here, release of the egg from the Graafian follicle is called ovulation. Now the status of the uterus is the same. It slowly progresses. It becomes thicker and thick, the uterine endometrium. So what is the event? Ovulation, once again I repeat, ovulation occurs in the middle of the cycle. If it's a 28-day cycle, it is the 14th day. If it's a 30-day cycle, it's the 15th day. What happens is the egg is released from the Graafian follicle. That's a major event, and the uterus is the same proliferation, that is regeneration of the uterine endometrium. Now moving on to the last phase, the 4th phase, which is known as the luteal phase or the secretory phase. Now what happens further is this one again regenerates, becomes very thick. Very, very thick. See, I am scribbling and make it very, very thick. Thick and spongy and glandular. 'Cause 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 So what happens in the uterus? The uterine endometrium becomes thicker and thicker and thicker, and finally it becomes very thick and spongy and highly glandular with a lot of secretions. And therefore, because of this secretion, it's known as secretory phase. And why it is becoming very thick with and glandular and with full of secretion, make it conducive for pregnancy. Because for pregnancy, what is needed is implantation. For it to be implanted, it should be implanted in a proper bed. It should be firm. That's why it becomes very thick and spongy and highly secretory. So this is what happens in the secretory phase or the luteal phase. Now corresponding status in the ovaries, what has happened. Now we know the Graafian follicle has ruptured and released the egg. So what yesterday and all the previous classes and all I've taught you what is a ruptured Graafian follicle called, or an empty Graafian follicle called. An empty Graafian follicle is called corpus luteum. So we have this as a corpus luteum. Initially, after the rupture and release of the egg, the corpus luteum is large. But slowly as days passes, say let this be 17, 18, 19, 20 and it's going to the 25th, 28th day, what happens to corpus luteum? It slowly regresses. See, it's becoming smaller and smaller. Okay, but the uterine endometrium is becoming thicker and thicker. Okay, so these are the two events, the uterine event and the ovarian event occurring during the luteal phase. Once again, I am repeating the last fourth phase, the luteal phase or the secretory phase. What happens? The uterine event is the uterine endometrium further thickens and becomes glandularized with a lot of secretions, making it conducive for implantation. And meanwhile, the status of the ovaries is the ruptured ovarian Graafian follicle, which is called corpus luteum, is present. And this corpus luteum, as days passes or progresses towards the 28th day, what happens to corpus luteum? It becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. Okay, so I hope all the four phases are clear with respect to 1, the duration, 2, the ovarian events. When you talk about ovarian events, you're only emphasizing on the ovarian follicle. And 3, on the uterine event. Uterine event, again we are emphasizing only on the thickness of the uterine endometrium. I hope this is clear with respect to these 3 aspects. Now to complete the cycle, we have to mention about the 2 sets of hormones, the hormones released by the ovaries and the hormones released by the pituitary. The ovarian hormones. Which are the 2 ovarian hormones? Estrogen and progesterone. Next, the pituitary hormones. FSH and LH. So this also should be incorporated, then only the cycle will be complete. Now, first let me concentrate on the ovarian hormones. So recollect the source of estrogen. Which is the source of estrogen? Estrogen are secreted by the follicular cells surrounding the ovarian follicle. We know this is the ovarian, this is the oocyte, and then surrounding it are the follicular cells. These follicular cells only secretes estrogen. So follicle cells secrete estrogen. So the source of estrogen is follicular cells. Then source of progesterone we learned is corpus luteum. And we know what is corpus luteum. An empty Graafian follicle is called corpus luteum. So this is depicting a corpus luteum like a flower, incomplete diagram. This is the corpus luteum. This is going to be the source of progesterone. Having this in mind, correlate and we can draw the graph. Okay, connecting it with your NCRT text diagram, see what I have explained earlier, uterine events, they have given the side profile of the uterus. Rather than drawing the uterus a number of times, 28 or 30 times, they drew the side profile, the cutout, cross section, not cross section, the side profile of the uterine endometrium. Look at the thickness, it decrease and slowly it progressively increase, maximum and then again decrease. And look at the ovarian events. Look at the ovarian follicle. This is the immature ovarian follicle during menstruation. This is immature. Now you see the mature, it's growing primary to secondary, secondary to tertiary, and tertiary to the Graafian follicle. See, then rupturing of the Graafian follicle to release the egg. And then we have the empty Graafian follicle called corpus luteum. See, initially it's so big, then next it becomes smaller and smaller. So this picture should be very clear in your mind. Time and again I am saying this is very important because it can be asked directly as different stages of ovarian follicles, which I have given as assignment. Also, it's very important to complete the cortex of the ovary. When you know these stages, you can place it in the cortex of the ovary. And lastly, the menstrual cycle also hold importance because now we are going to correlate with the secretion of the hormones. Now, in the text, they have used blue color for estrogen. Look at estrogen. We know the source of estrogen is follicular cells. Look at the number of follicular cells in this first case. Few. Now here it slowly increases, then increases, maximum. So we can see slow increase of follicular cells because they are surrounding a bigger size, they become more in numbers. So which means that the amount of estrogen secreted is going to increase progressively. Look, you correlate with the size. Look, few follicular cells, so the estrogen produces very trace. Now slowly as you progress, see the number of follicular cells surrounding the oocyte is increasing. So you can slowly correlate with the ovarian follicles and draw your graph. It peaks here. Where did it peak? At the mature Graafian follicle, because there we have maximum number of follicular cells. So the level of estrogen is very high. See here. Now what happens? Ovulation takes place, it ruptures and there's no more follicular cells. That's why see the graph goes flat. Okay. Now next look at the progesterone. Progesterone, we know the source is corpus luteum. Is corpus luteum present here? Till here? No. So look at the curve, flat till here. But look here, there's a corpus luteum. So the curves peak up abruptly and look, it goes like this way. Look at the corpus luteum reduces, so the amount of progesterone reduces and thus the curves go down because the source is corpus luteum. Just correlate with the size of corpus luteum. Initially it was big size, so high level of progesterone. Then as we move from day to day, the corpus luteum regenerates, that is degenerates, regresses, so the amount of progesterone decreases. Okay, so this is very easy to mark. You need not by heart the curve, how just spatial by hearting. No, just correlate with the ovarian follicles. Okay, so once again look at the blue curve, that is indicating estrogen. First it is slowly increasing as the number of follicular cells surrounding the ovarian follicle increases. See, it reaches the peak at the Graafian follicle and then it falls flat. Now you will be worried about a curve coming here. That is because another ovarian follicle has developed in the ovaries. So even if you leave it flat here, it's okay. Now look at progesterone, which is indicated with magenta color. See, there's no corpus luteum initially, so it's flat, clear flat curve. It is not hiking, but see sudden hike in the amount of progesterone because it's correlated to the source, which is corpus luteum, and see it slowly falls, the curve falls down because the corpus luteum, the quantity is less, so the amount of progesterone release is also going to be less. Clear? So I have correlated the ovarian hormones with the ovarian follicles. This is the way to study the curves. Now what about the pituitary hormones? Which are the two pituitary hormones, FSH and LH? Now here you can just blindly study. FSH and LH surge or peaks in the middle of the cycle. So it peaks in the middle of the cycle means it peaks at ovulation. So from this what you can infer? What we can infer is that FSH and LH surge is responsible or it induces ovulation. So look at the pituitary hormones. See, FSH is given red color, it's flat, and see it peaks here. Peaks, see where it is correlated to ovulation. See here, ovulation. Just before ovulation, it peaks, which means it is responsible for rupturing of the Graafian follicle, and then again flattens. So you can learn this just like blindly. Next, look at the FSH, LH. See here it is flat and it suddenly spurts here at ovulation, just before ovulation. just before ovulation. Ovulation is here, children, but just before ovulation, which means it is the LH and the FSH that is responsible for rupturing the Graafian follicle. Then ovulation takes place and then it's flat. So pituitary hormones are very easy, both FSH and LH, it peaks in the middle of the cycle, that is just before ovulation, not correctly at ovulation, because these two hormones are responsible for ovulation. So just the previous day it peaks, so that what happens, the Graafian follicle ruptures to release the egg. So after it peaks, you can see ovulation taking place. So recap of the menstrual cycle. The menstrual cycle has 4 phases mainly: menstrual phase, follicular phase, ovulatory phase and luteal phase. Now follicular phase is also known as proliferative phase, and luteal phase is also known as secretory phase. We know the reason why it's called proliferative and we know the reason why it's called secretory. Proliferative means it is becoming thickened or regenerating by a process called proliferation, and here it is becoming thick and glandular and full of secretion, that's why it's called secretory phase. Now why it is called follicular phase? Now because we learned the hormones, you can correlate. Here it is under the control of the follicle cells. All these changes that occur in the follicular phase is under the control of estrogen, which is secreted by the follicular cells. We know the source of estrogen is the follicles, so this phase is known as follicular phase. Rather than saying estrogen phase, we gave it based on the source. The source of estrogen is follicles. So whatever happens here is under the influence of estrogen, and the source of estrogen is the follicle cells. So it is known as follicular phase. Now look here. Whatever happens in the uterus and in the ovaries is due to the hormone progesterone, and the source of progesterone is corpus luteum. So it is called luteal phase, named after the source. The source here is corpus luteum. So they gave us luteal phase rather than saying progesterone phase. Actually it's under the control of progesterone, but it's named after the source of progesterone, that is luteum, corpus luteum. Therefore it's called luteal phase. So I hope you understood why it is also called by another name. So a quick recap. Menstrual cycle, now I'm incorporating the days, 1 to 6 days. Then the status of the ovarian follicle, they are immature. The status of the uterine endometrium, the unfertilized egg along with the uterine endometrium ruptures and is slowed off as blood through the vagina. So that is menstrual phase. Clear? Next, follicular phase. Follicular phase, the duration, say from 7 to it's a 30-day cycle, I am taking as 14 days. From 7 to 14 days, that is maybe on the 15-day ovulation. So just prior to that, I am making it as follicular phase. It's also called proliferative phase, you know the reason why. Now the status of the ovarian follicle, we can see the ovarian follicle is growing or progressing from primary ovarian follicle to secondary to tertiary and finally to the Graafian follicle. And what is happening to the uterine endometrium? It is regenerating through proliferation. Next, ovulatory phase, just 1 day, ovulatory phase. But it need not be tentative, it can be like 14 or 15 or 16. So it need not be like a calendar correctly on that day, but if a healthy person will have it correctly falling on the middle of the cycle. So let this be on the 15th day, because we are taking a 30-day cycle. So this ovulation took place on the 15th day. What is ovulation? The Graafian follicle ruptures to release the egg, and the status of the uterine endometrium is further thickening. And the last phase is the luteal phase or the secretory phase. So the days or the duration means from the 16th to the end of the cycle, that is 30th day. Okay. Now the status of the ovarian follicles, now we have the ruptured Graafian follicle, it is called the corpus luteum. We have the corpus luteum initially, say on the 16th, 17th day we have large size corpus luteum, but as the days progress, what happens to the corpus luteum? It degenerates and degenerates and becomes smaller and smaller. And the status of the uterine endometrium, the endometrium becomes further and further thickened, glandularized as well as full of secretions, and hence it is also known as a secretory phase. So these are the 4 phases, and also don't forget to incorporate the hormones. So now I am going to put the hormones. Here, follicular phase, all the changes occurring in the follicular phase is under the control of which hormone? Estrogen, and estrogen is produced by the source follicles. So it is known as follicular phase. Then luteal phase, all the changes occurring in the ovaries or in the uterus are under the control of progesterone. The source of progesterone is corpus luteum, and hence this phase is called luteal phase. And talking about ovulation, here you have to emphasize on which hormone? The two pituitary hormones, FSH and LH. These two hormones which are produced by the anterior pituitary all of a sudden peaks in the middle of the cycle, just before the middle of the cycle. So they are involved in inducing ovulation, rupturing the Graafian follicle. So here you have to make a note of which hormone, the FSH and LH released by the pituitary. This is called surge, all of a sudden increase, which stimulates or which induces ovulation. Okay, I hope this is clear and have a clear glance at the different phases. Thank you.